Appreciate the fact that yesterday Israel announced 4-hour pauses with a 3-hour notice in specific areas, as well as 2 humanitarian corridors that will allow people to move more safely and freely, to get out of harm's way, and also to access assistance. At the same time, much more needs to be done to protect civilians and to make sure that humanitarian assistance reaches them. Far too many Palestinians have been killed. Far too many have suffered these past weeks.
Right now, Israel continues fighting fierce battles against Hamas in Gaza. The Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, they're talking about the Israeli Defense Forces, say they are pausing military operations for 4 hours each day to let people leave to safety. Meantime, there have been heavy bombings in Gaza. A number of strikes have been reported at or near the hospitals. And overnight, raids by Israeli forces in the occupied West Bank have resulted in a number of deaths and dozens of arrests. Joining me now, former U.S. Air Force Assistant Vice Chief of Staff and NewsNation senior national security contributor, retired Lieutenant General Richard Newton. I want to start with the logistics of the battlefield, if we could. 90% of the IDF's armored vehicles right now are considered competent, but they're essentially repairing some of their equipment in the field. What are the challenges of a ground war like what we're seeing?
Well, good morning, Marni. The challenges are significant, especially as you mentioned, the logistics of the supply chain aspect of logistics to make sure you keep critical equipment such as armored tracked vehicles, other vehicles that up to a mission capable status. As you get deeper into the enemy territory, in this case, as Israel Defense Forces now are really moving into the urban centers of Gaza City and elsewhere, it's going to become more difficult to not only keep those supply chains or logistics supply chains open, but also to protect the corridors, provide those really critical parts that you're going to encounter, much like we did during, Desert Storm and Operation Iraqi Freedom later on in 2003 and 2004. Logistics can win the war for you, but it can also lose the war. And in fact, if you are unable to, operate your vehicles, especially in this type of ground urban campaign, that becomes more treacherous for Israeli militaries. They now get into a very difficult urban block to block and literally facility to facility fight.
Yeah, door to door. In this case, it's tunnel to tunnel in this labyrinth of underground tunnels. It's also been reported that the IDF has uncovered some of Hamas's battle plans in the process, and it's moving into the terror group's military corridor. And we've seen some images of this. They are learning more about the group's central command. What else do we know about their weapons, their underground infrastructure as they move closer into where they're hiding?
Well, the fact that they're getting access to, or reportedly getting access to some of their planning, I think is critical. How current that planning is, it could go all the way back to several months or even a year or so ago of their initial planning. But if they've got, again, some plans that deal with now the current fight and or some contingencies that Hamas would be considering based on certain aspects of the Israeli Defense Forces' approach into Gaza City, that could be critical as well. They'll also encounter what are not only the nature of the weapons, but the type of weapons that are being used against Israeli forces. And then that will help them perhaps to certainly understand with situational awareness what those weapon suites look like, but also how they can come up with counter-defensive systems against maybe weapons they had not necessarily anticipated. It's not just ground weapons, Marni. It could be air-based weapons such as drones as well. So still more to be found here, but we are beginning the very difficult stage for the Israeli attack aspect of this, the most dangerous stage, I believe, of Israeli Defense Forces as they now encounter very deeply dug in Hamas terrorists.
And as we look, General, at some of the video just a moment ago, it's inside these tunnels. As you look at it militarily with your experience, what do you notice about their tunnel system, their ability to hide out, and how long they may have been planning to do this?
Well, they've been really increasing their tunnel capabilities and the effectiveness as well as reach, really since 2007-8. So they've had years to expand these tunnels, which is has really made it very complex for certainly Israeli intelligence sources to really understand what's underground, point one. Point two is that this is where their command and control and their weapon storage areas and others are located, as well as you and I have talked about before. This is where the hostages are located as well. This is where Hamas, the terrorists, really have, if you will, the high ground, or really ground below the surface. They know these tunnels. They know exactly the entrances and the exits, as well as emergency exit points. They're booby trapped. They can move some of these booby traps around, but nonetheless, it becomes very difficult. Once Israeli forces, and I do believe they're now in the tunnels, at least a portion of them, once they get into the tunnels, it's going to become very, very complex for them. This is not going to be a matter of days or weeks, probably months.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.